Alright, so welcome to lesson 3 of this songwriting class, and we're about to get boring! Well, it's actually interesting, and hopefully something of this will be new for you guys, but we're going to talk about music theory. I know that this isn't a music class per se, so we're going to try to go through everything quickly. However, this stuff is important to know for composing. And so this is an important part, particularly when you're putting music to the words that you have. And we've got to do it sooner or later, so I'm going to go ahead and do it sooner. And then I believe all of you know how to play some sort of instrument. So you should be familiar with a lot of this already, but if you're not, you should learn this. And with this, you could even just go to a piano and write chords for your songs and melodies. So we're going to give you a basic overview of all of music, and hopefully we're going to do it in like less than 10 minutes. So in Western music we have two systems or two ways of dividing notes, and two scales basically that we use notes on. There are more tones than these tones. Chinese music, for example, uses what is called semitones. However, in Western music, we stick with a much more simple form of music, and that is, well, there's two. There's one that is the most simple, and for example, the harmonica is limited to this. So a harmonica starts on one note, and then it only has 8 notes, and you can't play anything besides those 8 notes. That's your basic 8-note scale. So here we have 3 different ways of portraying that scale. You could call the notes note 1, note 2, note 3, note 4, note 5, note 6, note 7, and then 8 is the same as note 1. Or you could use a system, and this system is very popular in many parts of the world, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. I don't really like this system very much because you can only use this system in one key. And when you stop using it in one key, it gets confusing. You can use it in every key, but I don't like it. For a singing system, this works, but really only if you're doing in one key. But there are some singing traditions where you actually just sing the names of these notes, like yeah. So that's been one traditional way of teaching singing. So then the Western, particularly the American way of doing this, because in Mexico they use more of this. The American way of doing this is C, D, E, F, G, A, B. Well, A to G. 7 letters of the alphabet. And so that's just your basic 8-note scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. If you see a song written with chords that are like this, you can look at this chart here. C is do, D is re, E is mi. So when someone says, oh, we're going to play in mi minor, that means that we're going to play in E minor. That's the key. We'll talk about keys later. But those are your basic 8 notes. Of course, you'll notice on the piano, we have a few more notes. On a piano, we have the white and black notes. And so the white and black notes bring us to a total of 12 notes. And this 12-note scale has a little bit more variation in it, a few more things we can do. And so we'll go, you look here in the piano, you've got the C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C are all the white notes. And so if you were just going to play in the key of C, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, da, 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 right? I wish I had a piano for this, then you could hear it without me just singing it. So these 8 notes are your scale, your basic scale in the key of C, okay? But in our 12-note system that we have, and don't ask me why we picked it exactly this way, I'm not really sure. We also have these 5 notes that are between these other notes. And there's 5 of them, and they can each be called with one of 2 names. Like this one between C and D can be called C sharp or D flat. So what does flat and sharp mean? Flat and sharp mean one above or one below. So when we say C sharp, we're saying That's C, 1 up. And when we say C flat, that would mean C, 1 down. But let's look at the piano. There is no C flat, is there? Well, technically there is. One note down from C is B. So B would be C flat. Nobody's ever going to write that on anything, but flat just means one note down, sharp just means one note up. And so any of these notes could be called flat or sharp. F sharp is the same exact thing as G flat, right? So here we have 12 notes. So we've got the 8 scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Let's see if I can do the other scale. The other scale would have no skips in it, so it'd be C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp. Is that right? I'm not sure if that was right. Anyway, my ear's not that great. But so you've got extra notes in there anyway, and it sounds different. And if you play all these notes, it sounds kind of weird. So all in all, like I said, we have 12 notes, and so that's A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, G, F sharp, G, G sharp, and then we're back to A again. 12 notes altogether in our Western system. We'll notice there are 2 places where we don't have a flat or sharp. That's between B and C, and also between E and F, right? So between E and F, there is no sharp or flat. Between B and C, there is no sharp or flat. That will become important in a second. On the guitar, we have a similar system. So this is your guitar. If we were looking at it, here's a guitar like this, right? And we're putting spaces where the strings are. That's not how they actually write these things when you're doing chord charts, just so we can have the names of the notes that are here. So on the guitar, you have open, you have your 6 strings, E, A, D, G, B, E, and then you have these going up, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A. What is that? Well, we're just going up these 12 notes, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp. So the notes on the guitar, when you go one note up on the guitar, you're making what is called a half step along these 12 notes. So a half step is just a step from one to the next, right? And then a whole step is when you skip one, A to B. A to B. B to C would be a half step. So why is that important? Because we're about to talk about scales. Next paper. Here we have all of the scales and the chords within that scales. Every song that we play starts off with one main note. That would be your like bass note, your home note for that song. Usually the song will begin and or end on that note. So if you're playing a lot of songs, especially on the piano, it's easiest to play in the key of C, because then I can just play all white notes. I don't have to worry about any of these black notes up here. And all the chords I will also play will be along these white notes. Because only those 8 notes are in that key. So while we have these 12 notes, most of the time we only use 8 of them in a song. When we use another note that's not in the scale, it's called an accidental. And like jazz and blues use a lot of this, or fancy classical music does, but most of the time this is very rare in worship music. That doesn't mean you can't do it. It sounds cool sometimes. So anyway, like I said, each key or scale would have a bass note, but we could pick any note as that bass note, right? Oops, I didn't fill out all my scales. I'm gonna have to take a picture of it after I filled it out later. So for example, in the key of C, we have 8 notes: C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. That's obvious, we know that. So how do we make a scale though? In a scale, there is a relationship between the notes in the scale. So from note 1 to 2, it's a whole step. Note 2 to 3, it's a whole step. Note 3 to 4 is a half step, right? on our piano, that's between E and F. Note 4 to 5 is a whole step. Note 5 to 6 is another whole step. Note 6 to 7 is another whole step. Boom, boom, boom. There's these black keys in between, so we're jumping over them to make whole steps. One giant leap for mankind. And then we've got a final half step to get back to home base at C. So that's between the 7 and 8, we've got a half step. So that relationship between whole steps and half steps is the relationship, and that's how you come up with all of the other keys. So I didn't look this up online. I was able to look at D and use these relationships between D and the other notes on the piano keyboard in order to come up with the scale for D. I didn't have to look this up. Why? Because D to E is a whole step. So D is the first note, and then the second note in that scale is going to be E. Okay? Then we need a second whole step. So that's why we have an F sharp in D. So if we were playing the D scale, we would be playing D, E, F sharp, half step, G, A, whole step again, which will be to B, and then another whole step, so it goes to C sharp or D flat, before coming back home half step to D. So there are two sharps in the key of D. And you can see I've written that out here. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. Cool? So you could do that, and if you wanted to, and if this was a more theory-heavy class, I would make you make this chart, and I would run you through it until you knew how to make your own scales. That's not so important for us, because we're more talking about songs and songs in general. For songs, notes are only important when we're making melodies, and we're not going to talk too much about making melodies because generally we can come up with fairly decent melodies just using our ears. So we're going to talk more about chords. Now, what is a chord? A chord is generally a combination of notes. It's usually 3 notes that we play at the same time. For example, the C chord is C, E, G. Da 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 da. All 3 of those together, right? And so that's the first note, the third note, and the 5th note in the C scale. So that is what we call a major chord. So the C major chord is the 1, the 3, and the 5 note out of the C scale. 1, 3, 5. Played together, right? And so that's a major chord. We also have minor chords. These are the most common types of chords, major and minor. So a minor chord, you just make the 3 flat. So instead of playing C, E, G, you'd play C, E flat, G. And that would be C minor. Why is that important? Because minor chords sound dark and mysterious. And also, when we play just these white notes, playing in the key of C, that means, well, the D, like I said, the normal D chord has this F sharp. But if we're playing in the key of C and we want to use a D chord, the chord that will be in the key will actually be D minor. And we can see this here, that if we play the 1, 3, 5, and we move 1, 3, 5 up and down the scale that we have here, that the 1 chord will always be major. That's what that big I means. The 2 chord will always be minor. The 3 chord will always be minor. The 4 chord and the 5 chord will always be major. And the 6 chord will be minor. 6 chord is the most important of the minors. And then the 7 chord will be diminished. We rarely ever play that chord. It sounds funny. Diminished chord, both the 3 and the 5 are flat. I believe that's how that works. So, what do these numbers mean? Why are they important? What do these chords have to do with anything? Well, like it said, the 1 chord is your home base. It's usually the chord that starts it in the song. If you want to end the song and have resolve and have it sound like, it's finished, you have to play that chord at the end. And you can just play it once and let it ring out and it sounds good. The other important chords in a key are the 4 and the 6 and the 5. If you've ever heard of the 4-chord song, the 4-chord song uses only the 1, the 4, the 5, or the 6. So the 4-chord song doesn't matter what key you're in. You can play most popular songs with 4 chords, and you could play them in A flat or F sharp or C. For example, usually they're played in G because that's a popular thing to play, a popular key for the guitar. But you can play the exact same song in G by transposing it. What does that mean? So, say we're singing a song in C, but C is really high for you. You can play the exact same thing by transposing it up to E. And so if we transpose the song, all of our 1 chord, instead of being C, will be E. So that'll be our home bass, and all the other chords will follow off of that. So instead of, if we had a C, say we had a song that was C, A minor, F, G, then the song, if we transposed it to E, would be E, C sharp minor, A, B. It's a very, very common chord progression. It's the 4-chord song. A lot of songs are those 4 chords, and you can play them in E if you like, or you can play them in C. It's the same difference. It will sound slightly different because the guitar has different sounds in different keys. So for example, E sounds really good on a guitar because you can play all 6 strings in the key of E, whereas in the key of E flat, it's very difficult to play pretty chords. So if you had something in E flat, you would either capo, put a capo on the guitar to change the tone and make it so you could play in E, or you could just transpose it and sing it 1 note up and sing it in E. Okay, so why were we talking about that? Oh yeah, we were talking about the chords, right? So we have these chords. So the 1, the 4, the 5, and the 6. You'll notice the 1, the 4, and the 6 share quite a few notes. So for example, the 4 chord in C is F, A, C. So it's got a C there. So moving from the C to the F, these 2 fingers, these 2 notes are moving up 1, and that one's not even moving. So what sounds good to our ears is usually when something stays the same, or we're just walking up 1 or down 1. Yeah, Western music is pretty boring. There's really not that many great leaps. Most of the time, our music moves up or down 1 note, or most of our notes stay the same and 1 will change. So for example, many songs start with the 1 chord followed by the 6 chord. The 6 chord, A, C, E, A minor, shares 2 of the same notes as the C chord, C, E, G, right? So these 2 are the same, and then you do it, but then it's minor. So it's like, it doesn't sound like a big leap to your ear, but it's more like dun, and it makes you a little sad. There's conflict, right? So you have a home and then immediately conflict coming into the story. Okay, so that 6 chord is your most popular minor chord because of that. The 4 and the 5 are your 2 other major chords in the key. Major chords sound nice and fairly happy, so we like those chords too. The 5 is often used as a transition chord because the 5 chord is right around that C chord, that number 1 chord. So we've got the C, B, and D would be here. And so if we just slip that up, 2 of those notes up, then we've got C and E, and then we have to bring it back to, oh, the G was already in the chord. So we just slip those 2 notes up, and then we're back at home. So the G both hints at the C that is coming and also slides right up into it. So the 5 chord is often used in pre-choruses and before a chorus, like really build up, da na 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 na, da, and that da will be the 1 chord, because that's our home bass. And most times, the 1 chord will be the first chord of the chorus, unless it's a more minor song, in which case it will be the 6 chord. The 2 and the 3 we don't use as much, but they do make things a lot more interesting. The 2 can substitute for the 4 chord. The 3 can substitute for the 5 chord. or we can just walk up to them, or we can use them in other ways. So these two chords are minor. If you wanted to play, you could play any song 1, 4, 5. Well, not any song, but you could play songs 1, 4, 5, and then it would sound really happy. Or you could play instead 6, 2, 3, and it would sound very minor and have some dissonance to it. So why is all of this important? Because when you're writing songs, you want to communicate using music. And so when you're communicating using music, you're going to have to use your scales, know what chords are in a key, and, well, you don't have to, but generally your stuff is going to sound more coherent if you use the chords from one key. Now, if you want to make things sound more interesting or more mysterious or more vague, you can switch from one key to another in the middle of the song. Usually you do that by going to the 5 chord from that key. So if I like walked down from C to B, and then I could switch to E because that B prefigures that E really well, right? So that's usually how you do a switch in the middle of the song from one key to another. That's called, what is that called? I don't remember right now. Modulating. Well, that's a full modulation, where you change and you start in one key and then you go to another key. That makes things really interesting, unless it's the really cheesy way that a lot of people do it, where they just go up one or a couple keys at the very end of the song. So instead of singing hallelujah, then it's hallelujah, da, da, da. And it sounds more epic because we're singing higher. It works sometimes, and it really can make you feel something, but it's been overdone. Then you can also do a 1 chord modulation. So for example, if you wanted to do an interesting modulation in the key of C, you might play an A instead of an A minor, which would be adding an accidental, because you'd be playing has a C sharp instead of a C. That might not sound very good, but it might sound interesting. Just depends. For example, in the key of G, a lot of times we'll add an E instead of an E minor, and that sounds interesting. I believe it's the key of G we do that in. Maybe it's the key of C we add an E to. Yeah, I think it's the key of C. But at any rate, you can add chords that aren't in a key to make things more interesting. However, if you do too much of this, your song's just going to sound like chaos, which can sound cool if you're trying to get across something chaotic. But if you're just trying to convey something like walking, for example, you might just want to do 1 and 4. 1, 1, 1, 4, 4, 4, 1, 1, 1, 4, 4, 4. And there we just have like walking along. We have forward motion, but we're just rocking back and forth between these two chords, right? But if we want something more dramatic, we might want to put more chords in, like the 4-chord song. We got dun, 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 dun. We've got this sense of building, the sense of ominous. There's conflict, but then it resolves, right? And what else? Yeah, but if you wanted to convey, you know, more of a confusion or something, you could, you know, throw in a chord from a different key or something like that. Good musicians don't only play everything in one key all the time. However, if you're trying, it really depends on the mood you're trying to get across. I use those 4 chords from the 4-chord song a lot of times if I'm just trying to create a song that is basic, straightforward. But if I want to create something that's more interesting or more challenging musically, I might mix things up a bit. I might play some more advanced chords like some 7s, which we're not going to get into. A 7 chord is when you just add the 7 note to your 1, 3, 5. So you can make things more complicated if you want, and that makes things more interesting. Some really good songs like Switchfoot's Only Hope. that was made famous by Walk to Remember, that has a modulation in it. It goes from the key of G to the key of E, from the verse to the chorus, and then back. That's pretty crazy, but it sounds really cool. So you want to use modulation sometimes, but to keep things basic, pick a key, and normally you know what key you're fairly good in singing in or that you like singing in. For me, I can always sing something pretty well in E. D is super easy for me, and D is one that a lot of churches like to use. But some girls prefer G or other places. It really depends on your voice. Not all girls have higher voices. Not all guys have lower voices. So yeah, that is a basic overview of the different chords. Like I said, in every key you have 7 chords. In every scale and in every key you have 7 notes. Your key is just your home base for the chords. There was one more thing I wanted to say. So, how do you know what key a song is in? Well, first, look for the first chord of the song. For example, I have a song here that we were working on today. So, here we've got G, G. G is the first chord of each of these parts. So this song, and it is probably in G. We've also got the 4, the C, and we've also got these 2 and the 6, right? It's in G, A minor is the 2, E minor is the 6, C is the 4. So this song is in the key of G. Although with those chords, it's kind of, it could actually be in the key of C. It's kind of in a vague space between them, and you could throw a D in there to say, hey, we're going towards G. Or you could throw an F, because all of these other chords are also in the key of C, E minor, C, G, and A minor. So you could throw in an F and say, okay, sorry, that's not where we're going. So that is a basic overview of your keys and your scales. So hopefully now when you play a song, you'll be able to tell what key it's in. Again, how do you do that? You look at your chords, and especially look, are these chords together, 1, 4, 5, and 6 in a key? If they are, then it's probably that key. Does the song start and end with this chord? If it's not a minor chord, it probably is that key. If it does start and end with a minor chord, then it's probably the 6. So if a song starts with A minor, it's most likely in the key of C. And yeah, you should be able to tell. You also should be able to, using the information I just gave you, you could theoretically come up with every scale on a piano and play those scales. You can also come up with melodies, because melodies are just jumping around on the notes in a scale generally. And you can also come up with songs, because you can pick a key and pick the chords that you want to use from that key and see what sounds good with the words that you have. And like I said, certain chords will have a certain feel and different chords will have a different feel. You can use, like, all of these things are rules. And if you only follow these rules, you will be fairly boring. That doesn't mean you will be popular. Boring music is very popular. However, sometimes it's better to be simple than to be more interesting, because more interesting doesn't always sound better. Anyways, I hope this was helpful to you guys, and I'm gonna sign off.